What's up, y'all? Talon here. Today we're going to be going over the top teams from Sacramento and Stuttgart Regionals. Regulation H is closing out. We, I believe, only have Columbia Regionals, Toronto Regionals, and then the last Global Challenge upcoming next weekend. So important to basically get a final grasp on the teams in this meta. I do have EV spreads for all of the teams, at least in this, basically me scrolling down Pokemon Showdown. You can see all the teams that I do have. I think it's about 19, 20 of the teams. I'm going to be going over the top 16 teams from both of the regionals. There's a lot of overlap between the teams, so I didn't want to make like literally a new team in case there was just maybe one Pokemon difference or there was like a small Terra difference between teams, which is the case for a lot of the teams between Sacramento and Stuttgart. People took a Sacramento team and made small changes to optimize it for the metagame, but it's more or less just the same team. So if you want to try the different Terras, definitely feel free to do that. But I do have the PokePace with the EV spreads, as I have them in this video, in the description below if you want to use those on Pokemon Showdown for yourself. If you enjoy these type of videos as a resource, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and let me know what you want to see next from the channel. With all that being said, let's hop into the Sacramento Regionals. First, I imagine a lot of the more competitive players have already reviewed these teams just because I am a week late on this. I kind of took a break after Sacramento myself. Let's see if we can scroll down and find me here. Yep, I did end up finishing 55th overall, 7-4. I was kind of hoping for an 8-3, but I don't think I got more than 5 best of 3s with the team that I ended up bringing. Kind of was last minute between this and Rain, and ultimately went with this team that actually got top 4 at the Stuttgart Regional Championship. So maybe, partially it was a play issue, but I do think the European and the American metagames are definitely very different. Sacramento had a lot of very, very crazy teams, which won't go into all of the details, but there are some good ones in cut. Starting off, we have Carson Comfort's team, which I do have the EV spreads for, or at least some recreations of them. I don't think Carson might have a team report coming out. Yeah, here it is. But this team is basically very similar to the one that the Hodge brothers were taking to good success in Europe. The Psychic Seed Unburdened Sneasler with the Indeedee with the Expanding Force. You have Helping Hand to boost up that even in the face of Intimidate to take some crazy knockouts. And then the Electabuzz Ursaluna Blood Moon mode, which was really prominent on the stream. You have this max speed Electabuzz, which can even outspeed a Charizard, get a strong Electabuzz or a strong Electroweb off on it, or anything else, allowing the Ursaluna to outspeed it. With Modest on the Blood Moon Ursaluna, you're able to outspeed up to, I think if you hit an Annihilate, you'll actually be speed tying it with this Ursaluna because you're not timid, but everything else you will outspeed, which is a lot of the Pokemon in the metagames. The main differentiator between this team and the Hodge brothers team is the Incineroar. Basically, it's here to deal with the Sun teams that were rising to prominence and were really difficult for this team, truthfully. Redirection plus a very strong Heat Wave could deal with pretty much everything on the team except for the Electabuzz. That's part of the reason that it is timid and Terra Dragon, to resist the Heat Wave and deal a lot of damage with their Electroweb. But more consistently, you have the Incineroar, which can tank a hit from the Heat Wave or the Overheat. I did see some Blast Burn Charizard, which I think has a chance to knock out Incineroar in one hit, which is pretty crazy in the Sun. But yeah, basically the Safety Goggles to ignore the Sleep Powders, Flare Blitz to knock out Jumpluff, Fake Out to apply some pressure, maybe force the Charizard to Terra, and then knock off if they do go for that Terra. So overall, a strong team. Congrats to Carson on the first place. He did actually play a Sun team in finals. He played Joe Ugarte, who also got top 8 at Stuttgart. Went back-to-back, both regionals, doing really well. Joe's team is really strong in his hands, but I haven't really seen a lot of people use it to great effect outside of, I think Kean Campbell was on this team early on with Joe, but yeah, basically the idea is lead the Torkoal in the Jumpluff, use Overheat to eject pack out. You have Burning Jealousy to really annoy Scale Shot Dragonite, which can otherwise, if it dodges a Sleep Powder, be really annoying for Jumpluff. So if you hit a Burning Jealousy, you will burn them because they are boosting their speed, and yeah, suddenly their Dragonite's way less scary. I have it EV to live a Scale Shot most of the time, while still being max speed for the Jumpluff Mirror, but generally the game plan is go for Overheat on the Torkoal, allow the Typhlosion Hisui to come in with the Sun, a turn of Tailwind, or rather max turns of Tailwind, maybe something asleep, and then just go for Choice Specs, Terrafire, Eruptions in the Sun, and then go from there. Garchomp, Dragonite, and Kingambit are basically covering everything that the Typhlosion can't do that against. Dragon types don't love the Scale Shot. You force them to Terra with the Scale Shot. That's really good for Typhlosion. Garchomp can just outspeed and do a ton of damage to fire types, steel type, or not steel types, but fire types. Something like a Ceruledge that would otherwise be able to switch in. A lot of Flash Fire Pokemon don't love the combination of Dragon after they've gone for the Terra and the Ground before they've gone for the Terra. And then the Kingambit is really strong against Incineroar. You try and intimidate the Torkoal, and if Joe is cheeky with the Kingambit switch in, he can snag a boost from that. Moving along to the rest of the top 4, it was really interesting. In Sacramento, there was a lot of strange balance teams. This one made it to top 4. Flaming Victini, which was, I believe, a very prominent Smogon player, brought this Corviknight Garchomp balance team. It has Incineroar Amoonguss, Archaludon with Electroshot. I don't really think we've seen a lot of balance teams like this, and we also didn't see them at Stuttgart, so might just be a mastery of one's own team thing in the case of Flaming Victini, Akio. But overall, it's a really cool team. Not a whole lot to comment on outside of the top 4, or rather the top 8 match being really crazy against, I think it was David Huntner, I want to say. But yeah, really cool set. Definitely recommend checking it out. Cool team overall. Don't see a lot of Corviknight in the metagame, but this set with the Taunt, Brave Bird, Tailwind Roost proved to be really difficult for a lot of opposing balance teams to deal with. The other top 4 player was Marcus Dion using the same team as Carson. It was an exact mirror. They played in the top 4 with Carson taking it. Beyond that, there's a lot in the top 8 and the top 16. There's a lot of this team created by the Japanese player Elizabeth. It got second place at the Latin American Internationals, and a lot of people brought it, or very similar versions of it, to the tournament to get into the top 16. Highest finisher was top 8, Aaron Brock. Basically, the idea of the team is you have this Dragonite Ursaluna mode, so you can go for Tailwind plus Fast Earthquake with it if you want, or alternatively go for Scale Shot into your Archaludon, get it to +4 or +5, and then be dealing a ton of damage with Body Press, and then healing up with Sinistcha on both Ursaluna and Archaludon. You do end up taking lots of damage from Burn or just the original Scale Shot, so having the Sinistcha to continually boost up your already bulky team is definitely very cool. Last Pokemon on the team is the Goldango, which definitely has been seeing the most change. Originally, it was a Trick Protect set, but I saw multiple players switch to Power Gem to try and better handle the Marco Fierro Jumpluff Charizard team. That proved to be really difficult for this team to handle. Ultimately, I think it's still really hard if they hit their sleep powders to win against that team, just because you have no super solid resistances to it. Pelipper takes a lot from Heat Wave, Archaludon similarly. Really, it's only the Dragonite, and if they hit a Sleep Powder and break your multi-scale in the same turn with Heat Wave and Sleep Powder, the next, really, if they hit a Sleep Powder and you don't get a first turn Wake, you're kind of just going to lose the game if they hit all their moves. So overall, a very strong team, but definitely has its fair share of tricky matchups. We also had a Sand team get into the top 8. I know this proved really difficult for Carson, and he basically just had to get a lot of 50-50s right to win the game. It's a Scarfandidi plus Sneasler. I guess it's most similar to the team that Nils Dunlop got first place at a regional earlier in the format, basically exactly the same outside of the no setup on the Excadrill. And then now we have an Annihilate and a Mousehold instead of, I think it was maybe a Magmar and one other Pokemon I'm forgetting, maybe a Tailwind setter. But yeah, basically kind of a 2-2-2 team of sorts where you have 3 modes of 2 with the Indeedee Sneasler, Tyranitar, Excadrill, and Annihilate Mousehold. Not really sure I'm a huge fan. I guess the Mousehold Annihilate mode does just cover a lot of what this sort of team is weak to. Intimidate from a Incineroar comes to mind as being kind of annoying, but the Annihilate with the Defiant definitely messes that up pretty hard. So overall, a really cool team. I think Tyranitar is primed pretty well into the American metagame, at least right now. There was a lot of weather at this tournament, and Tyranitar kind of being able to shrug off most of the weathers with Assault Vest and a lot of special bulk on this set. Definitely makes it quite strong. Next up, we have the first sighting of Palafin in a while. I think maybe one player got a top 16 with it, with a Tyranitar on a P2 balance sort of composition earlier in the format, but this is the first time we're seeing it on a Rain team over Basculegion or the other Pokemon in the metagame that are usually Rain abusers. Like, you have Hydreigon and Palafin. Outside of that, it's like a pretty standard Rain team, but usually you'd see it on Archaludon and a Basculegion here. And then David, I believe, David Elegy, follow them on Twitter, went for the Palafin and the Hydreigon. The Choice Specs Terrago set definitely messes up the most common Rain team, the Torviv, or rather the Rizabeth Rain team. With Terra Ghost and Levitate, you're able to completely ignore Ursaluna. They can't hit you with a Facade or the Headlong Rush unless they're somehow able to ground you with like a Weezing or something like that. So we saw multiple Terra Ghost Hydreigons in both this tournament and the Stuttgart Regional do pretty well, better than it has done in the past. I think people are realizing having a Pokemon that can basically just shut down Ursaluna, the Guts form, when people are basing whole teams around it, is definitely very valuable. Beyond that, it's a pretty standard Rain team. I'm not entirely sure what the Palafin's use case is. I guess it's a Haze Pokemon, so it clears up a Protect slot on the Amoonguss over Basculegion, but personally I feel like the Basculegion is still more generally strong, but maybe David just had a lot of experience with the Palafin and was able to expose a hole in the metagame for it. Next up, the last team in the top 8 that we'll be covering is this team by Kalen Brown. It's a team that we actually saw carry over with an Ursaluna over the Garchomp to get top 4 at Stuttgart, but overall very strong. It's a terrifying P2 team, kind of similar to the original P2 Ursaluna Flamigo team, except the Garchomp is over the Ursaluna. Hydreigon has that Flamigo slot has been rotating out throughout the format. We've seen Kilowattrel, now we have a Hydreigon, which is basically just here to, again, Terrago safety goggles, ignore the Ursalunas on opposing teams. Loaded dice on the Garchomp is pretty crazy. Beyond that, it's a pretty standard team overall. Not Life Orb, but instead a Iron Plate set on the Goldengo, so maybe could be indicative that it's a bit bulkier. But for the EVs, I just have it as max speed, just to test out initially. Backing out of the top 8, we'll look into the top 16 teams. Most of them are actually, if you look at it, there's a big congregation. There is this Sun team, there's a pretty standard Rain team, which I'm going to cover in the Stuttgart Regional, just because it is very similar to the team that got finals there. We have another of this team, very similar to Carson's team, except the Incineroar is an Archaludon, which is an interesting choice, definitely more offensive, but yeah, it's a pretty standard set, I imagine. Just if you make the Archaludon timid max speed, Terra Electric, that's usually what these sets run. You could go modest if you want to, but yeah, not a lot to say in respect to that. But outside of that, it is this big string of Rain teams covering a lot. So I have, going to skip these, but I do have the EVs for these teams. I'll go into those in a second. We have the Psyspam Rain team, which Joseph Selmer, I played Johnny Selmer actually in round 10 and lost in a pretty good set. So definitely a strong team overall, but basically the same Pelipper, Archaludon, Basculegion, Amogus team for the most part that we've seen a lot of, but instead of the Incineroar and the Goldengo, we have a Sneasler and an Indeedee with Choice Scar, so very much an offensive take on Rain, which was able to go pretty deep in the tournament with 2 separate players making day 2, and I think going 8-3 and 9-2 overall, so definitely a strong team. This is Brian Collins, one of the best Psyspam Trick Room players in the country. Has done really well across multiple formats with it, carrying that over once again, I think, 10-1 before losing in the top cut. All this is pretty standard. Ursaluna Guts, Hatterene with the Covert Cloak, Expanding Force, and Dazzling Gleam with the Indeedee. Psychic Surge is definitely a strong combo. The Terra Blast, Terra Fire is kind of interesting. Mystical Fire is only 5 PP weaker while having a secondary effect, but maybe there are some roles where you just need the Terra Fire and that 5 extra base point to take some key KOs. Not entirely sure of that, definitely not an expert on this archetype. Covert Cloak is cool, you can ignore Snarl as well as Rock Slide flinches or even Dire Claw from Sneasler, so for example if you go for Terra Fire in front of a Sneasler, you're guaranteed to get Trick Room up, unless they, I guess, Terra Stellar read that and go for a close combat and crit you, which is an option, but not that likely. Definitely less likely than a Dire Claw Sleep, so you take that for sure. Then we have a Gallade, which is kind of your wide guard bot. You have Indeedee Hatterene, which is actually pretty susceptible to people going for a Snarl or Make It Rain combination. Like if for some reason you play against Garchomp plus a Garchomp plus Goldengo and they're like Terra Flying, Life Orb, Make It Rain, you can just go for Earthquake, Make It Rain and deal with them that way. Gallade kind of makes people think twice about that by having the wide guard option. Whether it's on the field or not, it's definitely a risk if you try and make that your only game plan against the hard Trick Room teams. If they lead the Gallade and make a correct read on that turn, you can definitely just lose the game off of that. Torkoal is very offensive. It is Terra Fire Choice Specs, which honestly with Helping Hand is starting to KO even resistances to it, so very deadly. And then last Pokemon on the team is the Mousehold with Population Bomb. But I think what it's probably most for is actually to beat Imprison Indeedee Male, which was popping up a lot on the Carson team. Carson ultimately didn't go for Imprison, went for Protect, but it was definitely on the team, or at least some variants of the team that were popping up at LASC, so pretty smart choice here. You can pop the Terra Ghost in front of a Sneasler, Indeedee lead, or really just any lead, go for the Population Bomb, and if you hit a decent amount of your Population Bombs, you'll knock out the Indeedee in one shot, and get the Trick Room up with your Indeedee, Hatterene, or Gallade. So overall, definitely a very strong metagame adaptation. Brian definitely the best hard Trick Room player in the world at this point, I would say pretty confidently, had another deep run with it here. So those were all the top 16 teams from the Sacramento Regional Championship. Probably a bit of recap for a lot of the more competitive players, but wanted to give my EV spreads for those in case people are starting to test for the GC or Toronto or Columbia Regionals. Next up, we're going to go into the Stuttgart Regional Championships, which was won by Eden Bachelor. I believe that's their first regional championship, Xeno VGC, I think they had some results going back to like 2015 or 2018. Maybe I'm confusing that with someone else, but definitely a player that has been solid for a long time, finally got their regional championship, so congrats to them. Using the same team that I think someone got top 16 with at the Sacramento Regional Championships, as well as Latin American Internationals. Was able to take it all the way with a couple of terrestrialization changes to a top finish here. Looking a little bit deeper, it is the Scale Shot Haze Tailwind set, which is really interesting. Was originally on the Elizabeth team, but is starting to proliferate a little bit. I do believe that Alex Gomez and Eric Rios also had it on their team. This pairs really well with setup sweepers like Goldengo. You get a nasty plot up, or really just you get the Tailwind up for the Goldengo. That's pretty cool. You can go for Terra Steel, Make It Rain next to Haze Dragonite, like after you get the Tailwind up, and then go for Scale Shot the same turn you go for that, and then go for a Haze, and then go for it again. So that's a pretty cool combination. I think on this team, originally it was Terra Steel for Brady and Justin. However, Eden ultimately shifted some Terra types for sure. The Amoonguss to Terra Psychic, the Ursaluna to Terra Water, basically just giving things a little bit different defensive Terra types, and then switching away from Fake Out Sneasler to a Throat Chop set, which is pretty interesting. Beyond that, definitely just a very strong balanced team overall with Assault Vest Ursaluna. It's definitely a Pokemon that is starting to become really strong late in the format as people have figured out the best way to optimize for it. I think someone told me that the Stuttgart stats were like basically 50% of the teams either had Ursaluna Blood Moon or Ursaluna, the Guts form. So Pokemon that just does have the base stats to stat a lot of Pokemon in the format, bulk-wise and offense-wise. Now we have the Carson team winning in the previous weekend with the Life Orb set, and now the bulkier Assault Vest set taking a win here. So definitely a Pokemon to be on your radar if you're preparing for the next couple of events online and in person. This next team was a fairly standard rain team that I was talking about, has doing I think a top 16 at the Sacramento Regional Championships, but originally this composition with an adaptability set, Marco Fierro took to a top 16 in a European regional, and as this 6 has just continued to be very strong with the Choice Band set ever since, with some differentiations on the small things like Terra types, but overall has been strong consistently. Ground Terra on the Pelipper is kind of interesting. It makes you immune to Electabuzz's mono electric coverage, which is pretty cool. Outside of that, you lose the immunity to Fake Out, or at least the ability to threaten Terra Ghost into Fake Out, which is kind of important, but definitely trade-offs there. Archaludon is choosing not to respect Amoonguss as much in favor of respecting Sneasler a little bit more. So you're going Terra Bug so that if you go for the Terrestrialization in front of a close combat Sneasler, you'll resist the close combat and also not be weak to a follow-up Dire Claw. Outside of that, a lot of the choices on the team are very standard. Just very standard overall, except for the Rocky Helmet on the Incineroar. Definitely a lot of Amoonguss disrespect. Typically, we'll see one of the Archaludon or the Basculegion having a Terra Grass, or sometimes not usually both. Early on, we saw a lot more Terra Grass on the Choice Band Basculegion. I think Terra Water has become the most common, but yeah, having no Terra Grass, no safety goggles on the Incineroar, definitely a bit of calling the Amoonguss usage being a little bit low, which actually wasn't the case in the top 8. Despite that, Sisiat, the player who piloted this team, made it to finals, and Amoonguss wasn't really a huge factor in the finals, so the Goldengo itself might just be enough of a deterrent to the Amoonguss that it's not that big of an issue. Backing up, we have a similar team that, as I mentioned, Kalen Brown got to a top 8 in the previous regionals, the same Safety Goggles Hydreigon set. I didn't explain the EV spreads, it's a little complex, but basically the Hydreigon, if you don't want to waste your Terra in front of a Sneasler, after an Intimidate, you should be living in Adamant close combat with this spread. The speed allows you to outspeed and Annihilate. If you want to, you could kind of bring it down to just outspeeding maybe a timid Archaludon, but I have it at this speed just to get a parting Draco Meteor, just because like nothing else on the team outspeeds it. I'm running a bit bulkier on this P2, just an experiment. You have the Incineroar, Amoonguss with Pollen Puff, so having the ability to heal the Goldengo and not be taking a Life Orb recoil, I could see being pretty cool. Outside of that, pretty standard team overall. We have another faster Ursaluna to be able to function in and out of Trick Room or Tailwind, which I like a lot. And then I think on Kalen's team, I was actually running the Incineroar with enough offensive investment to... this one I'm running bulky, but I think on Kalen's team I had it as an Adamant set that could actually in Tailwind outspeed and knock out a Sneasler after a Snarl consistently. So that's an option. I think that was like Adamant, just 164 hitting the bump point there, but you can also run a more defensive one if you don't think that's that common. If you're relying more on the P2 in the Ursaluna mode, or maybe Goldango to handle that, that is definitely an option as well. This next team got top 4 at Stuttgart. It's actually the same team with some changes that I brought to the Sacramento Regionals. Didn't do too hot overall, but Fabian Braun was able to take it to a top 4 here. I think on the original team it was fake out coaching, but just a coaching set here with a Unburden over, what was it? I want to say it was Poison Touch on the original, but Unburden, very strong. After you get knocked down to your Focus Sash, you get a double speed, which can let you go for one more parting Dire Claw, Close Combat, or coaching, which is pretty cool. A lot of really beneficial coaching targets on this team. Rillaboom loves a coaching, can become really monstrous, and honestly, you can use coaching more defensively on both Electabuzz and Volcarona. Become really hard to knock out for a lot of Pokemon. Like a coached up defensively Volcarona with a couple Quiver Dances is really difficult to deal with leftovers and grassy terrain from Rillaboom healing it up pretty consistently. We also have a King Gambit. There wasn't a lot of King Gambit that did very well at this regional, or honestly the other one outside of Joe's Assault Vest one. So one of the last remaining strong King Gambit teams in the format. And then of course we do have the Scale Shot Dragonite, which benefits from the coaching. So overall, a very strong balanced team. Definitely not going to be running over anyone with something they're not used to playing at this point, but has a lot of tools to outplay your opponent. Congrats to Fabian on a really solid finish with this team. I honestly, after using the team, wasn't too impressed and didn't actually kind of discouraged one of the players in the top cut from actually using it at the regional overall, but they were able to cut with something else, and Fabian was able to take it even further. So yeah, definitely a team that still has some legs in the format, even though it does require a lot of finesse to play. Next, going into some of the top 8 teams in the format, we have, or in this tournament rather, we have a Talonflame Garchomp Goldango offensive team that is really strong, but I think honestly pretty precise. I think Rayan, who brought this team, has been using it to great success at another regional, also got a top cut, and is just basically an expert at this point. Basically, you have 2 Terraflying Pokemon in Tyranitar and Goldango that you can set up next to the Garchomp to do basically Earthquake plus Knockoff, Earthquake plus Terra Blast, Make It Rain combinations, and it's just really difficult. If the Goldango ever gets a Make It or a Nasty Plot up next to the Garchomp, it's just really hard to switch anything in with a couple turns of Tailwind left. Amoonguss is there to, protect the Goldango to allow it to do that. Maybe heal up the bulky Tyranitar and the Goldango after taking a little bit of damage and just become really difficult to deal with as people try to stall out Tailwind. You get one last cheeky Pollen Puff off. And then Milotic, I'm not really sure what it's there for. Maybe to deal with Incineroar with the competitive Scald option. Safety Goggles means you can maybe just pin down a Ursaluna, ignore an Amoonguss with that. And then Haze is really strong into Dondozo, being able to, with your very high investment into bulk. There's no Terra Blast, Terra Grass Dondozos in the format right now, and most of them are Terra Steel as their Terra type, so you're not really worried about that. You can go for a Haze and then just let the maybe Amoonguss, Goldango, Garchomp be able to deal with it in the late game, or even just go for Scald Burns and just continue to sustain your damage or your health with Pollen Puff. I could imagine that being a solid Dozo option in its own right. Most of the Tailwind teams in the format usually have a bit weaker of a Dondozo matchup, but Rayan here found a way to make it a bit easier. Going into another top 8 team with P2 Ursaluna, Incineroar, Amoonguss, Goldango. This time the differentiating Pokemon is the Tailwind Vivian. Similar to the Hydreigon, you're running a fast Ursaluna that can function in and out of Trick Room. This team also has Sleep Powder and Spore, so can definitely high roll some sleep turns to get the Nasty Plot Goldango set up in or out of Tailwind, and that's a cool set. I'm running the slower set that I think Andrew Zhang was able to win a tournament with in the North American Regional, but you could just go Timid Max Speed if you wanted to, not mess around with speed ties against opposing Goldango. That's definitely a valid approach as well. Last up in the top 8 is Maddie Moo. Maddie Morgan once again with this same team, pretty much the ground P2 team that is able to basically use it as a strong offensive and defensive pin. There's not a lot in the format that loves taking the ground and the ice coverage. You don't even have to go with the Terra a lot of the time, just because the special attack boosting Terra Blast does a ton of damage. You're basically just using it against King Gambit and Goldango. You have your own Goldango, which is trying to function in the Trick Room if you want to use the Andrew Zhang spread, or you can go Max Speed Timid and just function as a standalone sweeper if you want to. We also have a Sneasler going for coaching next to a Dragonite, which is a very interesting set. another Terror Ground with Stomping Tantrum, Scale Shot, Encore. I have not seen Terror Ground, Stomping Tantrum, Dragonite. I've seen a bit of Stomping Tantrum, and I've seen no Encore, so definitely doing something that your opponents are not particularly familiar with could definitely net you some solid wins. And then outside of that, we have Incineroar and Amoonguss to allow you to play really defensively with your P2 Gholdengo mode. So going to go into some of the top 16 teams, really just 2. The rest of them are more or less very similar to the rest that we see. We see Pato with the same exact team as Sisiot. We have Jonathan Marston, which is a variation of the Torviv team, except he has a Basculegion Life Orb over the Choice Scarf Gholdengo, and Incineroar over, I guess that would be over the Ursaluna. So kind of, different, but very similar game plan, at least with the Dragonite Archaludon. We're now just missing an Ursaluna Earthquake mode in favor of something that might be a little more consistent into Sun teams with the Safety Goggles Incineroar. I think Joji Kaida had Incineroar over the Gholdengo originally, but still had the Ursaluna, but now we have Basculegion there. So definitely not coming out of nowhere, but an overall strong adaptation that was able to take Jonathan to a deep run here, 10th place overall. Sydney Badian had a team that I do have featured with the EV spreads, just because it is very similar to something that I cooked up the EV spreads earlier in the format. I think City went 9-1 at the previous regional they attended with this team. The only difference was an Icicle Spear Ninetales over Icy Wind. Maybe realize that's a little less consistent. Not able to set that up for the Annihilate that consistently. Beyond that, basically this is an Auroraville Ninetales setting up to allow your Annihilate and Gholdengo to set up pretty easily. You have Magmar with Clear Smog to deal with Dondozo, which could ignore your boosting sweepers, but outside of that, generally the game plan is get the Auroraville up, set up the Annihilate or the Gholdengo, and then as a damage sponge you have Ursaluna, which takes damage crazy well in Auroraville, and then Dragonite similarly as a Pokemon that can kind of just bust holes in teams with the Scale Shot if you give it a turn. Last team that I have EVs for is the team that Eric Rios and Alex Gomez brought. I don't think Eric was able to make day 2, but Alex was able to get top 16 before losing ultimately. It's pretty similar to a team that they brought to LAIC and got, I think, top 16 and top 8 there. They have removed the Gholdengo that was originally on the team for a Volcarona. I think it was an Electabuzz before that has now become an Ursaluna Blood Moon. Outside of that, they still have the same coaching Annihilate. They were Focus Sash, now they're Lumberry to be able to avoid Dire Claw, Sleeps, or Paralysis from Sneasler. Just really deal with that way more effectively. Coaching for the Rillaboom and the Dragonite makes them really hard to beat. You can also honestly coach up a Incineroar, and that can become pretty threatening pretty quickly. You can also use coaching defensively on the Volcarona if you want to, like I mentioned for Fabian's team, but this is a Covert Cloak set, so less general healing, but you're not going to be susceptible to anything like a Dire Claw Sleep on the Volcarona. I do have an EV to live a Jolly one with 2 hits, so that's really nice. You have a solid chance to burn with them with Flame Body, and they can't go for a Dire Claw Sleep, Paralysis, or Poison through the Covert Cloak, so that's pretty favorable for you to get a Quiver Dance up and then just beat them 1v1. Looking at the rest of the teams, everything else is pretty similar to what we'd seen at the rest of the Stuttgart tournament teams or the Sacramento teams, so not going to go into too much detail. Let me know if you want me to go into detail on the rest. I figured this was going to be a pretty long video overall, so hopefully you guys enjoy this. Enjoy all the teams. I'll have the PokePaste featuring the EV spreads in the description below for you guys to use on Pokemon Showdown to get some practice for the last remaining tournaments of Regulation H. After Toronto, definitely going to be a lot of Regulation G content coming. I know a lot of people don't love the format, but I do actually enjoy it quite a bit, so going to be trying to take on High Ladder, Best of 3 ladder, as well as the honestly Battle Stadium ladder. I enjoy Regulation G quite a bit, so going to be getting a lot of content in for that. Hope you guys enjoy. If you're looking forward to it, please subscribe. If you want to see future content for the Global Challenge, Toronto Regionals, etc., the rest of Regulation H, that is sure to come as well. So hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one. And with all that being said, peace, y'all.